Hey everyone. I hope you're all staying warm and safe out there because the next several days are going to be incredibly eventful when it comes to winter weather across the United States. We're talking about not just one, but two major winter storms impacting the country, and they couldn't be more different. One of these storms is headed for the Northeast, where it's going to dump heavy snow and create hazardous travel conditions. The other, well, this one's a rarity. It's targeting the deep South, including areas like Texas, Louisiana, and even Florida. That's right, folks. Snow and ice could fall in places that almost never see winter weather. Combine these storms with an Arctic blast that's ushering in the coldest air of the season, and we've got a lot to cover. So let's break it all down. First, let's start with what's happening right now. There's a large storm system moving through the Ohio Valley, and it's already bringing light to moderate snowfall to areas like Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. If you're in these regions, you're likely seeing a few inches of snow piling up today. And that snow will continue spreading into parts of New England as we move through the evening. But this storm isn't just about snow. It's also creating a severe weather threat in the southeast. If you're in northern Florida or along the Gulf Coast, keep an eye on the skies. A line of thunderstorms is moving through this morning and into the afternoon, and these storms could bring damaging winds and even isolated tornadoes. It's definitely something to stay alert for, especially if you're in the path of those storms. But before we get into the details, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your support. As this system begins to wind down, the focus shifts to the Northeast, where another winter storm is already developing. This one is expected to hit tomorrow, bringing significant snowfall to areas like Maryland, eastern Pennsylvania, and southern New England. Snowfall totals will range from 4 to 10 inches in many spots, with localized amounts possibly reaching a foot in higher elevations. If you're in places like western Massachusetts or southern Vermont, get ready for heavy, wet snow. That's going to accumulate quickly. Wet snow like this can create whiteout conditions and even lead to power outages. So make sure you're prepared. This storm will be at its peak tomorrow afternoon and evening, but it's going to linger into Monday morning in parts of Maine before finally moving out. But while the Northeast is digging out from its storm, the South will be facing something truly rare. A winter storm that stretches from Texas all the way to Florida. This storm will begin to develop Monday evening in central Texas, bringing snow to areas like Dallas and Houston. Yes, Houston is in the mix for snow, sleet, and freezing rain by Tuesday morning. A storm will have expanded eastwards, spreading winter weather across Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and even the Florida Panhandle. If you're in cities like New Orleans, Baton Rouge, or Tallahassee, you could see a few inches of snow and, more concerningly, significant ice accumulation. This kind of event doesn't happen often in these areas, maybe once every 5 to 10 years, so it's important to take it seriously. As we move through Tuesday and into Wednesday, the storm will continue to grow. It won't expand much northward. Instead, it'll stretch west to east, bringing snow and ice to a long swath of the Gulf Coast and the southeast. And this means that areas like Louisiana, southern Mississippi, and southern Alabama could see several inches of snow, with parts of southern Louisiana possibly getting as much as 8 inches. Freezing rain will be a major concern in coastal areas, including New Orleans, where icy roads could make travel nearly impossible. If you're in these regions, now is the time to prepare. Stock up on groceries, protect your plants and pets, and make sure your pipes are insulated to prevent freezing. What makes this storm so challenging is that areas in the South just aren't equipped to handle winter weather like this. Roads won't be treated, and even a small amount of ice can cause major disruptions. If you live in these areas, it's best to avoid travel altogether and stay off the roads until conditions improve. By Wednesday morning, the storm will have reached northern Florida, where places like Jacksonville and Tallahassee could see a mix of snow and freezing rain. This is incredibly unusual for Florida, and even though the chances are low, the potential impact is significant. The storm will also bring snow to parts of Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia before finally moving offshore late Wednesday into Thursday. Meanwhile, behind these storms, we've got an Arctic blast that's bringing some of the coldest air of the season to much of the United States. Monday morning is shaping up to be the coldest morning of the week for most areas, with temperatures plunging well below zero in the Midwest and northern plains. Wind chills in places like North Dakota and Minnesota could reach as low as 50 degrees below zero. That's dangerously cold, folks, and frostbite can occur in minutes, so make sure you're bundling up if you have to be outside. This cold air will continue pushing southward, reaching all the way to the Gulf Coast by Tuesday. That's why we're seeing the rare combination of snow and ice so far south. This Arctic air is colliding with moisture from the Gulf, creating the perfect setup for a winter storm. Even as the storm moves out, the cold air will linger, keeping temperatures well below average for much of the country. It's going to be a chilly and active January with more cold and snow likely on the way in the weeks ahead. Before we wrap up, I want to touch on ice accumulation, which is going to be a big concern in the southeast. Freezing rain is expected along the Gulf Coast and in parts of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. This could lead to significant ice buildup on roads, power lines, and trees, creating dangerous conditions. If you're in these areas, avoid travel if possible and take steps to prepare for potential power outages. Let's talk snowfall probabilities. Southern Louisiana now has a near 100 chance of seeing at least 1 inch of snow, and even New Orleans is likely to get some accumulation. Meanwhile, parts of the Carolinas and Georgia have a 70 to 80 chance of seeing snow, with the highest totals expected in higher elevations. Northern Florida is a bit of a wild card, but there's still a chance for snow or ice in places like Jacksonville and Tallahassee. It's coming over Mexico and Texas and stretching into the southeastern U.S. These winds are carrying a ton of subtropical moisture with them, which is going to cause some storms in the south. But here's the interesting part. There's a little disturbance just a bit north of this enhanced wind streak. It's a small kink in the jet stream, and it's popped up over the last couple of days. It looks like it's going to cause a separate storm system from the one we've been focusing on. We've been watching this larger system that's causing an overrunning event in the south, but this new feature could bring something a little different. As we go into Sunday, this little disturbance is going to cause some interesting changes. And I think we could see enough cold air being funneled in for some snow in the Northeast. In fact, it looks like we're going to get a full-on winter storm stretching from DC all the way to Boston on Sunday. We're going to get into more details on that in just a second. But before we do, let's take a step back and check out the latest ensemble models to see what else we're dealing with. The ensemble models are still showing the massive trough settling in from Sunday into Monday. And that's the big Arctic blast we've been talking about for what feels like forever now. We're finally close enough to the event that we can start breaking down the details and get a clearer picture of how far south this cold air is really going to go. Let me zoom in a little here so you can see exactly what's going on. The plume of moisture from the Pacific is going to start producing heavy precipitation in St. Louis as early as 10 p.m. tonight. By tomorrow, we're going to see some isolated thunderstorms in places like Memphis and Nashville, with moderate rain spreading across the Dixie Alley region. Then as we get into the early morning hours tomorrow, heavy rain will be falling over the Ohio River. But here's where it gets interesting. Remember that little kink in the jet stream? It's going to allow just enough cold air to pour in on the backside of this storm and potentially bring some snow to places like Chicago and Detroit. In fact, Detroit could start seeing heavy snow as early as 9 a.m. on Saturday. From there, the storm will spread into the Great Lakes, with Cleveland, Buffalo, and the surrounding areas expected to see heavy snow. You guys up near the lakes might even see some lake effect snow on top of everything else. So get ready for that. Meanwhile, the southeast is going to continue seeing rain and thunderstorms. But we'll be watching this area closely because there's a chance it could intensify into a stronger pocket of convection that could produce some severe weather. We're talking about gusty winds and heavy rain, especially around New Orleans, Hobble, and the Florida Panhandle on Saturday evening. Now, back to that little disturbance we talked about earlier. As this storm system continues to evolve, it's going to link up with that larger storm we've been tracking. This means more moisture is going to be funneled into this region, and we're going to see a second storm form. We've been keeping an eye on that big overrunning event in the south, but this little system is going to develop into something else that could bring snow to the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. So by Sunday, this storm will start affecting areas like eastern Kentucky, southern Ohio, and parts of West Virginia. By the early morning hours, the snow will start to spread. And it's likely going to turn into a major snowstorm for the I-95 corridor, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston. This looks like it's going to be a pretty big snow event for these cities, and we could see some significant travel disruptions. But it's a tricky forecast, especially for cities right along the coast where we'll have that rain snow line. The models aren't completely in agreement, but we're pretty confident that places like DC and Boston will see snow, though New York City is still on the edge. So, how much snow are we talking about here? Right now, we're still not 100 sure about snow totals, but based on the models, I think we'll see at least a couple of inches on the northwest side of the Appalachian Mountains from Charleston, West Virginia, back to Pikeville, Kentucky. I'm more confident that places from Philadelphia to Boston are going to see 3 inches or more. The national blend of models is showing about 3.6 inches for Boston, which is probably a conservative estimate. But some of the models are showing that this storm could drop 6 inches or more. So we'll see what happens. As we go into the weekend and early next week, we're going to start focusing more on travel impacts. The snow is going to make things tricky from the mountains of West Virginia all the way up to Boston, especially in areas like New Jersey and southeastern Pennsylvania. The coastal cities will see that rain-snow mix, which can make roads a real mess. If you're in these areas, I'd expect a pretty hectic Monday morning commute. So plan accordingly. Now, let's talk about next week. The rare winter storm in the south is looking more likely to happen. There's now a 50 chance that we could see more than 3 inches of snow as far south as places like Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. This is huge. This type of storm is pretty rare in the south, and it's still a bit too early to pinpoint exact snow totals or ice amounts, but I'm confident that we'll see snow, sleet, and ice in areas that don't typically see it. This is a big deal, so we'll be watching closely. Speaking of ice, we also have to be ready for the possibility of ice storms in the southeast. That's going to make forecasting even more difficult because ice storms are harder to predict, especially areas like southern Georgia and northern Florida that aren't equipped to handle winter weather. We'll be keeping an eye on that too. If you're in these areas, especially where you see that pink color on the map, start preparing for possible power outages and difficult travel. Ice accumulation could make things tricky for days after the storm passes. As we go into Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week, the cold air will continue to move south and we'll start to see even more winter weather impacting a larger portion of the country. We're looking at wintry precipitation, possibly all the way down to Florida, and there's a chance we'll see a widespread winter storm across the southeast and parts of the Gulf Coast. Some of these areas could see snow, sleet, or freezing rain for the first time in years, so it's definitely something to keep on your radar. And of course, this is just the beginning. After these storms, we're likely to see even more develop as we move into late next week. We're looking at a pretty intense stretch of weather ahead, and I'll be here every step of the way to keep you updated. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications, and share this video with your friends and family so they can stay informed too. There's going to be a lot of misinformation out there, and I want to make sure you guys have the most accurate and up-to-date info. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit that like button. If you found this video helpful, I'll see you in the next one. And remember, stay safe out there. Goodbye.